Hello, welcome back to the channel. It is Dan, Nocturne Knives. Today I have part 4 in my freehand sharpening series. We're going to be talking about stones today. So I pulled out a bunch of stones and we're just going to be talking about the stones you need. We'll talk about low grit, high grit, all the stuff about grits. How high do you need to go? What kind of edge finishes should you be looking for depending on what you want to do with your edges. I'm going to talk about some stone recommendations. We'll talk about abrasive types and all that kind of stuff. Before we get into it, please don't forget to go like this video down below if you enjoy sharpening content, stuff like that. Hit the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. And check out my previous video right up there. And then also the previous videos in my freehand sharpening series. I'll have those linked up in the top right as well. And with that said, let's get into it. So first we will talk about low grit stones. We'll talk about our different grit levels generally and kind of what you're going to use them for. So we'll start with very low grit. And here you're going to be talking about like 120 to 300, 400 is going to be a really low grit. Here's an example of a super low grit stone. This is a 120 silicon carbide from Grit-O-Matic, and you can see how coarse this is, how large the abrasive is in this. It's very rough, going to leave a very coarse edge. I'll put up some pictures of examples like coarse, medium, high grit finishes in the top left corner, some microscope footage. But this kind of stone, you're going to be using this for major chip repair, reprofiling an edge. So say you need to drastically change the angle from like 25 degrees down to 15 per side. That's when you want a really coarse stone. So 120, here's a 220 Grit-O-Matic silicon carbide, and then here's a 320 Sharpening glass. And these are all going to be in that very low / coarse category. These are not really going to be good for finishing because the edge will be really, really coarse. And if you want an edge that's kind of like a saw blade, like tearing through stuff, maybe consider it, but in general, not going to be good for finishing. All right, next we're going to move into the medium category. So right squarely in the middle of medium, you have things that are like 800 grit to 1000 grit. Here's an example of a 1000 grit. This is a Suhiro Serax 1K. You can see much smoother, much smaller abrasive size. Again, you'll see some examples of finishes up in the top left. So this can be used, this is a great all-around stone. You can use it for light reprofiling. Say you want to drop a couple degrees off. It will be able to handle some small chips and edge damage, especially with given enough time. And it's going to be really good for finishing. It'll give you a good semi-aggressive edge, some tooth, but still some shine. It's really good for kitchen knives, for general everyday knives. A 1K 800 grit edge, something like that, is going to be really good. And this is going to be your biggest single stone potential. So if you're just going to have one stone, get it in this medium category. 800 grit, 1K, something like that. A great option to just have one stone and do everything with it. All right, right around this medium, you have medium lows, and that's going to be like 500 to 700 grit. Here's a 500 Sharpening glass, and this one is it'll give you a really coarse and aggressive edge, but still refined enough that it's not like a saw blade ripping into stuff. It's pretty good for finishing. You can do some decent reprofiling on this. It's not going to have the power of, say, a 320 or a 220, but you can remove some decent material with something like a 500 up to 700. And if you want an aggressive finish, this is a really good stone to pick. Again, this could be your only stone. Okay, and then that brings us into our medium-high category. This is going to be like 1200 to 2000, maybe 2500 grit. And this is where you'll really start getting a more refined edge. You're going to get a lot of polish in the right light. It's going to look like a mirror polish. It's going to be really easy to finish on too. The coarser stones, it can be harder to remove the burr because the stone is so coarse that every stroke you take, it'll be wanting to build up a burr. But these medium high grit stones, 1200, 13, 2000, are going to be much easier to finish on because they won't build up a burr nearly as fast, and they'll usually tend to be harder. So they're going to be good for finishing. You'll get into a more polished, refined edge. If you want more of a smooth cut but still a little bit of bite, this is going to be a good option for you. Here's an example of a pocket stone. This is a Veneve. This side is F400, which is around 1200 grit, I want to say, maybe 800 in the JIS system. More conventional grit, something like that. It can be really good for finishing. I'll put up a picture of something around this. You got this Veneve. This side is in their F800, which is like a 2500 grit, 22, something like that. This is really good for finishing. It gives you an edge with some nice shine, but still some bite. That's a really good edge. This stone will not be doing any significant material removal. So if you have chips or you want to do any reprofiling, this is not the single stone to get. You need something 1K or lower to be able to remove any significant material. So this is going to be purely for finishing or moving up in your grit progression. You could also use this for touching up a very lightly dulled edge with no real edge damage. Maybe you got a tiny little roll, or it's just getting a little dull. You could touch it up on this stone, but this is not going to be doing any significant material removal. All right, so that's our medium highs. Now we're going to move into proper high grits. So we're talking 2500 up to 5K or so. Here's a Veneve F1200, and this is getting up into like that 5-6K range, 5 or 6,000 grit. Here's a Suhiro Rika in 5,000 grit, and now you're starting to get really fine. This is where you'll be stepping into mirror polish territory, especially if you add on a strop at the end. This will get you really, really good mirror polishes. Like with a little bit of stropping, you can have a perfect mirror polish. This is going to be a much less aggressive finish. So this will be a really, really refined finish. Very little grit, very little bite. Going to be good for push cutting into stuff. So like thick plastics or rubbers, this is going to perform really well. In wood, this is going to be ideal. If you're doing whittling, wood carving, say a chisel, planes, stuff like this, you want to go 500 or 5,000 grit at least, and possibly up from there. And then, of course, for mirror polishes, this is 25 to 2,500 grit, maybe 3,000 is probably the minimum you need for a mirror polish. Ideally, you're going up to 5K, 4K, 6K to get a good mirror polish. And then after that, you have your super high stones. So this is going to be 5,000 and up. You can get up into 8K, 10K, 20K, 25,000 grit stones. This is really, really, really high grit. You're only really going to be using this for, say, straight razors or high-end woodworking tools, stuff like that. This is the kind of thing you don't need. This is purely for refining the edge and getting a perfect mirror polish. I don't think this is necessary. I don't go past this Veneve F1200, which is like 6 or 7K, my Rika 5K. I don't go past that on stones. I don't really think it's necessary. For what I'm doing, I don't get benefit out of that. But maybe if you've got straight razors, stuff like that, look for the super high stones, super high grit. All right, so those are our basic stone grits. We'll talk quickly about abrasive types. So your standard abrasive is going to be aluminum oxide. It's super cheap. You got a lot of options. It's long lasting because you can flatten it quite often. This Suhiro, both my Suhiros are aluminum oxide. And this is good. The downside is it requires a lot of flattening. You got to flatten them pretty often, especially depending on the stone. If it's a softer stone, you'll have to flatten it more, say a king or something. A Shapton, like a Shapton Pro, those will require less flattening. And the other downside is it's going to work slowly on some steels and not really cut others. So a super high carbide volume steel like S110V or 10V, aluminum oxide really isn't going to work very well for those. Right, and then next we have ceramics. So these are going to be a little pricier. This is a ceramic abrasive. This Shapton glass is a ceramic abrasive, and this is going to cut faster. It's going to be a lot harder and require less flattening because the stone is so hard. The downside is you usually have less variety in these. You can get Spyderco ceramics. Shapton has some ceramics. They're definitely a little less common. The aluminum oxide, you'll find that a lot more. Now we'll move on to diamond. So a diamond abrasive on a plate is going to be probably your fastest cutting option. Here's an example of a very well-worn diamond plate. This is a 140 from Chef Knives To Go. So this is going to cut really fast. The other pro is it requires no flattening. It's going to be super flat, and it will always stay flat because it's diamond bonded on top of a steel plate. So it will never go out of flat. You never have to flatten this. It's going to be good for flattening your other stones. So say this Suhiro, when I need to flatten it, I can use this to flatten it. And diamond plates are one of the best options for that. Some downsides are they will wear out eventually. So eventually you'll dull all these diamonds and you can't refresh it or resurface it like you can a different type of whetstone or water stone like aluminum oxide or silicon carbide. Once these wear out, they're pretty much done. And then they usually don't go up that high in grit. The highest diamond plates that I've really seen are like 12 or 1500. So you can't go all that high in grit most of the time, and they're going to be very expensive. A nice diamond plate is pushing $100 a lot of times. So definitely a pricier option. All right, then we're moving on to an interesting abrasive type. You have resin bonded diamond. So this is going to have some of the advantages of diamond in that it cuts fast and it will cut just about any steel you want to put on it. High hardness, high carbide volume, whatever. A diamond or resin bonded diamond will cut that quite well. This is nice over something like a diamond plate because you can actually refresh the surface on these. It behaves kind of like a water stone, but it cuts like diamond. And it's really hard, so even though you can refresh it, it will stay flat for a really long time with a lot of use, so you don't need to flatten this often. The downside to these is they're very pricey, and there's not that much of a selection. The selection is definitely more limited. I know Naniwa makes some that are quite expensive. Big Brown Bear, Triple B Handmade, has some really nice ones, but they're pushing $400. These Veneves are $100 to $200 for this size. This size is actually pretty reasonable. It's like 25 bucks or something. So these are definitely more expensive, but their performance is outstanding. These might, in terms of quality and performance, this might be the best stone available, the resin bonded diamond. Of course, there are different quality levels. Veneve is slightly on the lower end of the quality. Something like Big Brown Bears are top level quality, but you'll pay for it. And then you have something like silicon carbide, like this. So this is going to cut fast and work well on high hardness, high carbide volume steels, say S110V, 10V, stuff like that. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than diamond though, which is nice. This from Gritomatic was like 30 or 40 bucks for a pretty thick stone. So you're getting good performance on hard steels at a good price. I don't have as much experience with these. I only got these recently, and they're a little bit less common. I definitely haven't seen these as much as, say, something like aluminum oxide or ceramic, but they're really good value and they cut really fast. So this is actually, it could be quite a good option if you want to work on high hardened, high performance steels for a lower price. Okay, we'll move into a couple recommendations for stones. So our first basic recommendation is going to be a Sharpening Pro, and I'll have all of these linked in the description. So Sharpening Pros are going to be really good, especially if you're working on lower carbide volume or lower hardness steels. So they're going to be really good for kitchen knives, woodworking tools. Sharpening Pros are great. They're really hard, so they won't go out of flat very quickly. So they'll require less flattening. The downside is they're not good for high hardness, high wear resistant steels. They just won't cut it as effectively. They're really only good for lower carbide volume, lower hardness steels. But if you're doing kitchen knives and chisels and stuff like that, they'll work really, really well. Next, you have something like the Suhiro Serax or Rika 5K. I really like these two stones, 1K, 5K. They're really good. They're kind of in the middle in terms of hardness, so they'll really cut most things you throw at them. They can handle a soft, lower performance steel really well. They can equally handle a higher hardness, higher wear resistant steel. I've done a lot of 20CV M390 on these two stones, and they perform quite well for stuff like that. But they'll also work well on chisels and kitchen knives. So that's a great versatile stone to use. Another recommendation is going to be Atoma or DMT diamond plates. Atoma is going to be the premium, DMT more budget. Those are going to be really good for harder steels and if you want to get things done quickly. I should say on the Sharpening Pros, that is a splash and go stone, so you only need to splash water on it and you're ready to go. These Suhiros are going to be soaking stones, so you have to soak them for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Before you can use them. That's the downside. DMT plates, they're ready to go as is. You can use them with water or use them dry. So they're super fast. They'll never go out of flat. So if you just want a stone to get in there and get things done, get out, a diamond plate might be a good option. Just be aware you can sometimes have some finish inconsistencies and your grit level is going to be limited and they're going to be pricey, especially for something like a nice Atoma. Another recommendation is going to be king stones. So all of those are going to be pretty decent and they're going to be really good for hard steels. So if you want to work with really hard, high wear resistant steels with a normal water stone, king is going to be one of your better options. A soft stone handles hard steel better. Hard stone handles soft steel. The downside to these is they're going to require a long soaking time and they'll need a lot of flattening. But they're a good budget option, especially. Then if you want to step up in price, you can take a look at Veneve resin bonded diamond. This stone cost $100 and their premium version of this costs around $200, but the quality is really high. It's going to do great on high wear resistant steels and it will require minimal flattening. It's just a really good stone. It's really nice to work with. The resin bonded diamond is a great option, and I've been liking Veneve. Also, if you want to pay less but still work on high wear resistant steels, look at the silicon carbide. These Gritomatic silicon carbide are going to be really good stones, especially for the money, and they'll cut high wear resistant steels quite fast. They're not as good for softer steels, though. And then lastly, you have Spyderco ceramic stones. These are going to be really good in the medium grit and for finishing. They have a lot of pocket stones and portable stones. So take a look at Spyderco if you're looking to travel with your stones because they require low maintenance. They're going to be good for touch-ups and finishing and stuff like that. I'll talk real quick about progressions in grit progressions as you're sharpening. So this is important because you can't move up too quickly. You can't go, say, from something like a 220 silicon carbide up to a 5K because you'll be spending all your time removing these scratches. You have to move up in steps to be able to get a good consistent finish. So a classic progression is going to be something like a 320 up to a 1000 and then up to a 5K, and that will get you a good mirror polish in a reasonable amount of time. You'll set the bevel with the 320, remove any chips, You'll refine it with the 1K, and then you'll get your full polish with the 5,000. That's a good progression. If you just wanted an aggressive edge, you could go like 120 up to 500 and finish on the 500. That'll get you a nice aggressive edge, and that's a small enough of a jump. The 500 can cut fast enough to remove a 120 scratch pattern. Basically, your basic rule is going to be you want to double or triple approximately from one grit to the next. That's a decent rule of thumb. So 320, if you were to triple that, you're heading up to 1K. So that's doable. The 120, you triple that, you're getting into the 500 territory, stuff like that. Once you get over 1,000, you can make bigger jumps. So 1,000 to 5,000 is reasonable. Say 1,300 to 8K would be totally reasonable. That's a fine progression. 1,000 to 10,000, you might want something in between, but it could still be doable. So there's some basic grit progressions. You really don't need to overthink it too much, and you probably don't need as many stones as you might think. So like if you're starting on 120, you don't also need a 320 and a 500 and a 700 and then a 1000. You can go 120, 500, 1K, and that's a fine progression. You don't need stuff in between there. Okay, that was a bit of an information dump. I hope it all made sense and everything, and it was laid out decently. We'll talk about a few conclusions, and we'll get out of here. So I want to leave you with this. You really only need 1 or 2 stones, especially if you're not dealing with much reprofiling or many big chips and stuff. Say if you're just looking to sharpen your kitchen knives, a 1K stone is the only stone you need. You can get only this and get away with it and be totally fine. If you are facing some edge damage, you want to reprofile, stuff like that, get something like a 320 or a 500, and that will allow you to do some reprofiling, fix damage, and then you can move up to your 1K. You could really even go from 320 up to 1K. That would be a fine progression. If you wanted one coarse, one fine, you could do those 2 stones and be totally happy and get away with it. If you're looking for mirror polishes, you can take this progression you have, take the 1K, and then just add on something like a 5K, a 6K, and you could jump into mirror polishes super easy with a strop, and then you only have 2 or 3 stones to work with. You really don't need a lot of stones, is one thing I want to leave you with. So I hope that you found this video interesting. If you did, don't forget to go leave a like, drop a comment, let me know what your go-to edge finish is. I'd love to know how high you like to finish your edges. Do you like an aggressive 500 grit edge, or are you going up to full mirror polish, 5, 6, 8K edges, whatever. I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment down below. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.